Robbie says yes. Okay, great, thank you, and I'll pass it off to Shirley-Pat to begin the session.
Bananas, Sitana. Yeah, thank you so very much, Andrew. My name is Shirley-Pat, and today I have the explicit honor and privilege of facilitating a session on land-based planning with two phenomenal matriarchs. And you can find both Shauna and Joyce's biography and a little bit about both of them and where they're from and the amazing work that they've been up to on the CCP workshop website. So please check it out. They are amazing, amazing women. Today, instead of reading their bio, what I'd like to do is to introduce them and according to the medicine wheel. So in terms of an Indigenous medicine wheel, Shauna and Joyce from the East bring to our world illumination and truth. They have created a space for students and for community members to learn, for the next generation to share in their knowledge. From the South, these amazing women bring love, trust, and growth. They are committed to lifelong learning and sharing of their gifts. From the West, these women bring strength and experience and introspection, dedication to community planning, well-being, and healing. From the North, they bring cleansing and renewal, the coordination of community development and the delivery of programs and projects. And from the center, Joyce and Shauna bring connection and wisdom. They share today their lived experience, their joyful ways of being, walking, and talking, the ways of knowing and doing of each of the peoples and communities that they come from and whose teachings they will share with us today. Next slide, please, Andrew. We may have to go forward too, but that's okay. So as you can see, there's three of us. I am an adoptee of Tsilhqot'in, of one of the 6 Tsilhqot'in communities, the same nation that Joyce is from. But I am Mido. I'm about as pasty as you get. And Mido in the Tsilhqot'in language basically means not of the people. So I felt it was important in my role as a privileged settler of mixed ancestry that I create spaces and places for these amazing women to share their voices and knowledge. So my job today is to simply ask them a series of questions that came out of a organic, wholesome planning session that we had together. In the right way, it would have been done on the land, but COVID and distance meant that we did it virtually, but we brought the land into our discussion. Next slide, please, Andrew. And for me, it's really about this relational responsibility. And I bring Sean Wilson, Indigenous philosopher and methodologist, into the conversation here at the beginning, because I think it's important that we bring in, as Joyce always reminds me, the sacredness and the spirituality of the land and how it interconnects with everything, all the ways, the knowing, the doing, the protocols, the laws, the practices, the processes, the ceremonies, the songs, as we heard this morning. Next slide. And so my first question, this is what we're going to do today around the knowledge production. So I thought I'd give you guys an overview. And these are sort of the 4 questions. And we're going to do a little bonus piece because Joyce and I spend a lot of time doing fund development, and that's my career. So we're going to bring in some practical pieces, little bonus at the end. But we're going to tackle these 4 questions. And I'm going to ask them to each of the ladies and ask them to give us a little bit of their experience. And if you have any questions or comments or something sparks you, please share it in the chat. And then for the last about 20 minutes of this session, we're going to open it up because I honestly believe many times the answers to our questions are in the audience. All of us that are here today are experts in some way and bring knowledge of our own to share. So I'm hoping in the last 20 minutes, we can have a facilitated discussion together, or perhaps share some of the nuggets that you share along the way in the chat. Next slide, please, Andrew. So the first question to frame our conversation today, I'm going to ask first of Shauna and then of Joyce. So Shauna, if you could unmute your mic, and could you share with me, why is land-based planning so important? And Andrew, if you could flip to the next slide while Shauna is speaking, that would be great. And when she turns it over to Joyce, that'll be our cue to go to the next slide. Over to you, Shauna. Why is land-based planning so important?
Oh, you know, when I think of land-based planning, I automatically think of healing, and it's healing. It's literally like food for your soul, like, you know, because you get all of your nutrients and goodness for your body from the land or from the sea, and you know, and for the Wasanich people in my culture, we follow the patterns of the earth as we move, and half of our time as Wasanich people was spent out in the water, half of it was spent on the land. And for us, we didn't see it as anything different. Both land and sea were exactly the same. And we tended to follow the 13 moons, having the 13 moons guide our activities. And this is different from, you know, regular calendar year, because sometimes there's 13 moons, sometimes there's 12. So for example, the moon that we're in now is Pakalenu, and it's the moon that turns the leaves white. And generally some of the activities that we would be doing is we'd be thinking about, you know, the change in the weather, the change in the climate, the change in the world around you starts to shift and move in different ways. And thus our activities, we were beginning to think about, okay, it's, you know, winter's coming. And we know the next moon is after this, I forget what it's called, but it's the one where you're putting away your canoe paddle for the year. And that's in November, you know, because that's when things get really rough on the ocean. And we begin to think about, like, okay, like, what are the things that we can do in the winter? And I really like the, you know, in our culture, one of the biggest animals that we connect to in this moon, the Pakalenu moon, and I'll put it in the chat after, is the hunting of sea lions and seals. And we would only do this around this time because we knew that it would keep us warm. It would keep us warm and nurtured. And another important species is the deer, and he teaches us such a really good a lesson. So I forget the story, but he basically teaches us that we are not to kill for the sake of just killing, you know. So you know, because it's not this, you know, it's basically with Wasanich law to say that if you're going to kill something, it's for consuming, it's for your health and your well-being, it's for having that connection to the land, and it's you know, just having that understanding about life itself and how precious it is. And yeah, so I mean, that's just like one example of one moon, and there are so many other different moons. And I think if you were to even just do a basic Google search on the Wasanich 13 moons, you find probably, well, there's a book that's out, first of all, that the Wasanich School Board has put out, and it's about the Saanich year. And it basically gives an idea of what the economic activities were, the animals that were important to us at the time, and a whole bunch of other cool things there. So yeah, school districts of history. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's, it was there. It's beautiful. And there's these lovely workbooks, and it has recordings, so you can also hear the elders say the names of the moons. It's really quite beautiful, lovely sharing. I love that. I love this how you've tied it into connecting me to the healing. Like all we need is from the land and the sea. And I'm going to pull Joyce into the conversation using an elder from Klaskha. And Jack would say to us, oh, this land conversation, water is life. And he'd remind us, water is life. And he'd say that in the language, and also just in every one of our meetings, he'd start with the reminder that the land isn't the land also without the water. So Andrew, if you could go forward to the slide, and I'm going to ask Joyce the same question. Why is land-based planning so important?
As Nkaini, meaning the people of the land, we go based on the seasonal rounds and how that kind of took our lives, you know, from one season to the next. And right now we're in Danjis, some say at Danjis, which is fall. That's after the leaves. The leaves are starting to fall, and right now we're in Banen, meaning the strong winds are coming. So each season we had, we'd go out on the land, and like Shirley-Pat said, I'm Tsilhqot'in, meaning the people of the river. Everything that we do, everything that we plan on doing is all around water. And we're reminded probably every time that we did go out to do some berry picking, whatever, out on the land, we were reminded to have respect for what was out there, because hundreds of years ago, it's just only been 150 odd years that we've had first contact, that our people were all about seasonal rounds. And it was amazing when Shirley-Pat kind of brought that back out. We don't realize that we're doing it until somebody brings it forward and saying, oh, wow, oh, that kind of puts a different spin on things, you know, but we're doing it every day. And our elders reminded us when we were doing our CCP, reminded us every time that we were putting something on paper that it should be, this is what we have to tie it back to. This is where we're losing the connection to. And when there's a story that my grandmother had told me, because I worked in archaeology for some time. When she finally came to me, we were out in a certain part of our territory that I believe, she asked me one day where I was, and I said in Minor Lake, and she looked at me and she said, I want you to be careful when you're there. I said, why is that? And she said, well, you're going to find pit houses, and those pit houses are graves. And I said, well, why were they not, you know, brought forward? And she said, because that is a prime example when you don't follow your seasonal rounds. She said, these people didn't expect, you know, the hard winter, so they all perished, and all they did was to cave in these pit houses. You know, there was, I believe, I'm not sure if there was 10 in one and 5 in another pit house, but they were all, because they had not listened to or looked at the signs of what the weather was going to be like. They didn't gather enough. And so that's where we come in as Nkaini. We refer to every First Nations as Nkaini, as people of the land. And when we do these I guess trips out on the land, the elders are going to open up. Shirley-Pat knows this, that when we have them confined in a room, they won't really talk. They'll allow us to do the presentation and kind of giggle and look at one another, probably thinking, oh my goodness, what are these two thinking? You know, but as soon as we took them out on the land, oh, the stories came out. I was just totally amazed as I was, because I remember the first CCP that we've done. We did it in a matter of, I think, 3 months. The first, because I was the last one to come in, and we just, it was totally different than when we did our second one. it totally flipped everything. So when you bring people out on the land, that's where their livelihood is. That's where everything ties back to what they were taught growing up. And I am so thankful every day that I had powerful, powerful women in my life on both sides of my family that reminded me that if you don't take care of your Angies in the fall, you're going to feel it in the winter. If you don't take care of your sun in the spring, you're going to feel it in the winter, you know, because that's planting season, that's gathering. So those are the reasons why everything that we do as Nkaini ties back to everything that our ancestors have done. Except in this day and age, I try to remind, I get the sometimes not so great look when I say sometimes we have to bring modern technology into the process and incorporate it into our 4 seasons. And it's just some of our elders think that we're kind of way out in left field, but for the younger generation, that's how they're starting to understand it. So it incorporating that is something that we have done. And yes, and we do everything with prayers. Thank you, Shauna. Everything that we do is in prayer. And my grandmother always said, if you're not giving thanks, you're gonna be punished somewhere down the line. And so everything is done in prayer. And as Shirley-Pat knows, I have songs, I have most of my prayers are done through songs. And so I have songs handed down, which I was totally amazed until I said it last night. I'm the 9th generation that carried a song. 9 matriarchs before me, or 8 matriarchs, I'm the 9th matriarch that carries this song. And so when you start putting it into words like that, you think, wow, oh my goodness, I feel so old now. So, but it's something that we need to keep in mind when we're doing our community comprehensive planning, is to think outside the box. And that's what we did. And it was, I remember the first CCP, it was horrible. I kept looking at it and thinking, I cannot think in linear form. I cannot think in linear form. And then this, not realizing that was just a guide, you know. I had never done anything like this other than land use planning before that. And I'm thinking, oh my word, everybody's life is in my hands now. And so I am thankful every day for the people that I meet. And like I said, water is important. Tuningal is the cold water. And we need to make sure that we're looking after those things when we put our plans together. So Tenasha.
And Joyce, you also remind us that youth have the best concept of the world today. And so bringing that knowledge forward, is different, that it's been done for generations and since time immemorial. But I agree, I think in order for us to bring it forward and to have that continued knowledge sharing, we have to look to the youth. They have the best concept of the world they live in, right? We don't. We live in a similar world, but we're at a different time and space. And thank you so much for always tying it back to the importance of ceremony and giving thanks. So first thing I did this morning, as Joyce taught me, was I have been drying tobacco from the seeds that Robbie shared previously and offered them to the land and to the water, because I knew we were speaking about this today. Andrew, could you go to the next slide for me? Now, I know these ladies have been talking about things in the very bestest instance, but none of us have had an easy 18 months to 2 years with the pandemic. And COVID has, unfortunately, in many ways, impacted the work we do, in particular, the capacity and ability to be out on the land and to do some of this engagement work that's required in community planning. So, Shauna, I'm gonna ask you first, as Andrew gets his tech sorted out. And this is my favorite phrase, I think, from our planning session. She made this statement, and I picked up on these 3 words because I thought it was such a lovely way to describe being flexible and adaptable. So, how has COVID-19 impacted your current work, Shauna?
Okay, so my current work, the work that I'm doing is a territory-wide marine and land use plan. And I had just started in November of 2019 at this job. So, there was like a couple of months there pre-planning work, and then in January, I started doing the in-person engagement. So for the Wasanich Leadership Council, we have 3 nations that we work with. And as a nation, we're actually missing one of those nations, which is Tsilhqot'in, which we've been actively trying to advocate to get them on board. But it just all of a sudden, like we did 2 sessions each in each of the communities. And after that, like in March, it was just like, it just came to a complete stop, of course. I think the whole world just stood still, of course. And, it was a real challenge, I think, especially because the people that I'm really trying to engage are the elders and the knowledge keepers and the youth as well, those 2 connections, which are really vital for future planning, because like you said, youth have this incredible perspective of the world, and when you bring the elders in who are knowledge keepers, you have the connection with culture and language and teachings, especially teachings in place, teachings at specific place names that we have all throughout our territory. They're all connected with laws of the land and laws of the sea. So it was really hard. But so instead what we did is we're like, okay, we can't engage people in person. So we decided to go back. And we decided to go back to, we have about 80 plus transcripts of knowledge keepers and elders that have been interviewed through various projects all throughout the time. And we basically just reviewed all of those transcripts and took out data. So like, what are the things that, people have said what matters most to them and things that are concerning them most. So, we kind of had to just be flexible and to move with the flow, and putting our thoughts sort of in motion that way. So I guess practical examples. We did a Wasanich celebration of culture, and that was one of our first virtual events in December. And we really wanted just to uplift our community member, because a lot of the times there could be a lot of negativity in our communities because so many different reasons. But we decided, because we couldn't really do a whole lot in person, we did a call out for people who had various talents. So for example, we brought in a poet, and we brought in a musician, and there were a couple of other poets too, actually. But the video's on our website if you ever want to check it out, at www.wasanich.com. And you can, it's about, I guess, about an hour long. But feel free to view it anytime you want.
I love it. And please do. The poet is amazing. I loved how you, and typical in knowledge keepers that I work with, they always answer more question than the one that you post. And so thank you, Shauna, for also giving us a couple of practical how-tos about what did you do, right? When COVID kind of impacted your initial, right? This was the plan. I had this idea. We were going to do X. We're going to go on the land. We're going to be on the sea, and bam, pandemic. Okay, now what do I do? So this idea of putting your thoughts in motion and how could we utilize what we have. And I thank you for reminding us of that important lesson so many times. And Joyce and I experienced this with our elders too, right? I'm sure Joyce will talk about it, right? Why are you coming again and asking me? I answered those questions last year. Someone came with a survey. Like, why do you guys ask me the same questions every time? So going back and making sure that you've done your homework basically, and taken a look at that rich knowledge that's been shared, especially when maybe some of those elders have moved on, right? They've moved on to their next journey, and to be able to hear their voices again and to listen to them, and also to task your talent. A lot of the pictures that you see, Andrew, if you could flip to the next one, a lot of the pictures that you see that I'm sharing, in particular, the ones of the Tsilhqot'in nation, like this one I took, but all the other ones were actually taken by a youth. Her name is Lilius Nardi, and she's a talented young lady. And we, like Shauna, tasked our talent. So Joyce, can you talk to me a little bit about how COVID has led to some great reflections around resilience?
I guess in the last, in our Tsilhqot'in nation, we had, as every First Nations, as every Nkaini, probably dealing with the smallpox pandemic, and then having to deal with the Spanish flu, which the Spanish flu I think was the one that really hit home for me, because I lost a great grandmother when my grandmother was only 2 or 3 years old. They lost their mom to the Spanish flu. So when the pandemic came, it awoken a lot of trauma in our people. And there was silence for, I believe it was almost 3 months, where all of us were in our homes, and not really connecting with the outside world, because there was so much hurts that was hashed over throughout our nation, and then people having to go into lockdowns that now again brings a lot of trauma back from residential school, and being told that they can't leave their homes, they can't leave their communities. That became huge in I don't know with other First Nations, but in our nation, it became this huge elephant in the room that nobody was talking about. And you'll notice that it slowly started, probably 6 months into it, you slowly start to see people kind of awaken and start really talking about some of the things that they had to live through, because now it has kind of put a damper on all our summer harvesting to right going into fall, and how are we going to manage? How can we provide, for our families if we can't even, because there was no real rules as to what the isolation or the lockdowns were. It was just that they couldn't leave their communities, but they were never told that they couldn't go out on the land, but it was an assumption. And so one of the things that that we've done, as you can see, last summer, we decided, okay, we're gonna, Shirley-Pat and I are doing another project where this resilience is, this is a land that we're standing on. The picture that you see is people from my community. Many strong women came to this site. We call it Dildunda. It's powerful. This is where all our weddings and used to take place because of the echoing that we had. Everybody would stand on this knoll. It's off of Highway 20, west from here. It awoken a lot of things, and Shirley-Pat, not only good things, but bad things.
A bad thing. I shared it for a reason, Joyce, because it's a powerful reminder. powerful reminder of the importance of being on the land. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's something that we had to deal with. We still are dealing with colonization when we go out on the land. We were,
And, you know, we were accosted and
yeah, by a local rancher.
By a local rancher who didn't understand nor was willing to even have a conversation. And I can't tell you how proud I am of Joyce, how proud I am of all these Tsilhqot'in women who handled themselves, and how grateful I am for the young man you see here, who is a fellow adoptee, my brother, who handled it and took on the relational responsibility of dealing with a racist settler who was accosting women doing land-based ceremonies. Yeah.
And it's something that we learn, I think, because I don't live in my community. I live in the city of Williams Lake, and I did not realize, I've been a leader in my community for 8 years, did not realize that after over 20 years of being away from the community, my people were still dealing with the same issues that we were dealing with 20 years ago, where you have colonization, it runs deep. And so that's what got me thinking, okay, if that's the case, then most of the places that we use for traditional gathering to traditional hunting has no trespassing signs on them. How are my people actually able to harvest every year from the land? So that's where it became my goal, and I sit on the Women's Council for the Tsilhqot'in Nation as well. At the Tsilhqot'in Nation, for my community of Tsawout, it became clear that, you know, when we talk about doing plans, how do we incorporate these into the plans? That's what really came to mind. I am normally a very aggressive, outspoken. I don't sugarcoat nothing, but the day that we got accosted, something came over me that I needed to be calm and collected. I call that age now. Wisdom. I've been reminded that it's called age, and I'm coming into this time in my life now that not everything is a fight, and that we have to start trying to be reasonable as well, because I can't imagine, you know, I tried to see the other side of the picture and thinking, oh my goodness, I wonder if she's feeling very, very threatened, because we have very powerful women standing. And it just so happened that it was my sister and my two nieces, and to hear my two nieces speak made me realize we have done a good job with our youth. We have done an awesome job with our youth, and we need to recognize that, because they spoke from the heart. They spoke from what their grandfather taught them. They spoke from what their grandmother taught them on both sides. That really, it took me about a month to realize that. So I'm honored. And so this is when we do planning, we have to take into consideration that there's things out on that land that is so important to us that needs to go to the negotiations table as to how are we going to live with what's used to be so sacred to us. How are we going to live with these people that have claimed it to be theirs? You know, and so that's one of the bigger things that I'd like to reflect on. And looking at the pandemic, I never ever thought in my lifetime, when I'd see what's your pandemic plan? We would kind of shuffle past it and get to the next topic until the pandemic actually hit, that we realize, oh my goodness, we're living in this, and we need to somehow incorporate it into everything that we do now, and how we come into contact with the outside world. I now feel what my great grandmother and my great grandfather had to deal with. And the losses that we have in our communities, how are we going to bounce back from that? That's got to be part of the plan. Now, if anybody is doing any of the CCP planning, you need to look at how resilient are we going to be when we come back from that. And Shirley-Pat will tell you that I was hit in January.
Yeah.
I lost a spouse,
because
but
of it.
I have to be resilient for the sake of my grandbabies and the babies to come and my children. And so, and I'm a matriarch in my family as well. And so I need to make sure I'm looking at that one when I go into everything. So the resilience of our people is so, I am so thankful every day that, of who my people are, who the Nkainis are, the people of the land are. And if the smallpox didn't kill us, I could hear my grandmother. If the smallpox didn't kill us, if the Spanish flu didn't kill us and we're still here, that means we're going to be here for another 1,000 years. That we need to start looking at how are we going to incorporate all of this into to a plan that is going to lead our people. So that's where I'll leave resilience at.
And you answered the next one too. So you also helped us remember that it's about ensuring that understanding at all levels, right? Both internally, right, at all the levels of leadership, but also that external bridges. And I love how even in the horrendous experience that part of that day was, you remind us all that there was such joy in being on the land, such joy in showing these young matriarchs in the making a site that some of them didn't even know about or had only heard their grandmothers, and to have them stand and to sing and to hear the power of that medicine and those songs echoing through that valley was so powerful. And again, I thank you for reminding us to be flexible and to integrate plans. So Andrew, I'm going to get you to actually skip forward, because as usual, these lovely ladies have sort of really talked about how you embed existing data and how you have to work with everybody. So I'd like to go forward to the question around how do we tell our story? Because this is what Joyce was talking about, right? The pandemic has created a new chapter in our story. And that means that we have to look to see how the chapter after the pandemic will be, and how do we keep that thread of our story and our community stories going, as her Etsu said, for the next thousand years, and that continuity of knowledge sharing. So Shauna, when we were talking about this, you said this, I'm going to get you to flip forward to a slide, Andrew. Shauna answered my question so succinctly, but I'm going to get her to expand a little bit on what it means to ask the community.
Yeah, that's exactly how I answered. I was like, well, I mean, you really need to ask the community and get their permission, consent, which is so key in this work that we do, when you're trying to build trust and relationships, and even something as simple as, when you think of like, how are we going to tell the world who we are in the beginning section, of whatever plan you're developing, especially a comprehensive community plan, I would say too, is that, so many times our history have been told by other people about us, who we are, and they have that dominant narrative out there about us. But then how do we want to share our own history and in our own way to reflect accurately who we are? And, even, throwing that out to community members when you're doing engagement, you can get a whole, spectrum of answers from, well, I don't know, but, you will get a whole bunch of different answers. And, even if, and even when you do bring in story to that, giving the right acknowledgements and the right, just getting the right permissions from, maybe the storyteller that told that story, or, whomever. So it is a really complicated question, and something that only the community can give consent to. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
I love it. It's fundamental. Ask the community. I think we all need to just maybe make a button. We could just wear that as planners, whatever planners we are, and we'll just, ask the community. And it's also about the next slide, because you mentioned this as well previously, but also in how you answered around tasking the talent, right? So in doing that, you have these beautiful, talented people, but is there permission for that symbol? This is a symbol from your community. It's shared publicly. So that, that has to be requested from that artist and that talent. And it brings me, Andrew, if we could go to the next slide, to a little piece I'll bring in. So, in a month's time from now, I'll be defending my PhD, which I've had the honor to do and co-produce with Indigenous and settler people in the Pacific Northwest. And one of the key things that Joyce and the community taught me when we asked, as Shauna said, that very question, really brought me to Schnarks. And Robbie and Andrew, I don't mind uploading this or providing a link for this free to the article. I can do that through my university. I think it's really important. It comes from Indigenous philosophers and scholars. And what OCAP stands for is you own it, you control it, you have access to it, and you possess it. So any of the data that's collected, any of the knowledge, any of the information, and in the Tsilhqot'in Nation, they have their own database that has very strict who can access it, right? Who can access transcripts, who can access traditional ecological knowledge, who can access elders' testimonies from the Tsilhqot'in landmark case where the first time title was ratified by a colonial Supreme Court. And so OCAP is one of those things that is an internationally recognized and accepted Indigenous methodology for protecting, as Shauna said, what you ask of your community, for ensuring, as I said, that they own it, that the community controls it, that those who provided the knowledge have access to it and they possess it. And why this is so important, and I think I'm going to tell a funny one of why what Shauna said about ask the community is so important, brings me to a question I asked my matriarch sisters, my Joyce, my Violet, and my Shawnee. I'm like, okay, so as Shauna said, I'm reading all this extracted information about the history of the Tsilhqot'ins, predominantly written by white men. We'll just put it out there. And I'm coming across this phrase based on everything Joyce just shared with you. You'll realize why my brows kept knitting, that claims that the Tsilhqot'in people are nomadic. I sent it to the ladies. Shawnee's response was my favorite. We were not just walking around willy-nilly. We followed the seasonal rounds, the dens and the chen, the protocols, our processes and practices, and we interconnected with the land, as Joyce shared with her story of the village that didn't in Minor Lake, to ensure the well-being and health of the people. And as Etsu said, for now, for tomorrow, and for 1,000 years to come. So next slide, if you could, Andrew. And this comes to a little piece that I want Joyce to help me share about the bonus. You're going to find that there's lots of plans, as Shauna said. There's plans that you can pull from the shelf, that you can pull data from, that you can kind of ground yourself in that data and knowledge, and you can embed the information that's already been collected from the knowledge keepers. But beyond that, as Joyce and I found, almost every department in a community has to do some kind of planning, right, Joyce? What do we get if we share the workload? We can also share the resources. So if you offer, for example, like Joyce did, well, if you let me embed the health department's information, I will help you with the health plan. And so we were able to complete, with her help, the First Nations Health Authority health plan, and then integrate that into the CCP. And by doing so, it meant that we could leverage the resources, do more on the land and out by the water activities, including, I'm going to get Joyce to talk a little bit about this one. She told you about when we went out the land, things shifted, but it went out on the land because we accessed National Indian Brotherhood Trust funding for language revitalization. And we used the language revitalization language classes. So Joyce also has a Class 5 license, which lets her drive the community van. So we filled the van with community members and elders. And Joyce, what happened when you got about 2 kilometers down the highway from the band office? What happened to people we had never heard from before?
It's funny because there's women in our community that are silent. They'll sit back and watch everything. And I'd ask a question and they'd look at me like, you already know the answer kind of look. And so I would just leave it until we got these dollars to make sure that I can take elders out on the land. And so we were headed to the top of Bella Coola, which is like a 3.5 hour drive from from Tsilhqot'in one way. I got a van load of elders. It was funny how I put it out there, and all of a sudden, all these silent elders that would sit back had their names on the list, and I'm thinking, okay, so we get probably, I don't even think it was 10 kilometers from the community, and all of a sudden behind me, I start hearing chatter, I start hearing giggles, and so I look at them in the rearview mirror, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm not sure what's going on here, because these women were quiet for the last 2 years that I've known them. And all of a sudden there's lands that are coming, you know, because we have to cross the whole Tsilhqot'in territory to get to the top of Bellacoola, to the top of Bellacoola Hill. And you start to hear stories about, this place is where we went fishing. This is the place that we went hunting. This is where we moved to in the fall. This is where we moved to in the spring. Oh my goodness, this place has grown, you know, and I'm thinking, and I am so thankful every day, like I say to the matriarchs in my family, that I can speak my language fluently, because everything was done in our language. All the talking, all the joking was all done in our language. And we get to the top of Bellacoola Hill, and I was explaining to them, they're funny. I was explaining to them some of the sites that I know of, like our petroglyph sites, sites that war has happened, with first contact when we had the Tsilhqot'in War, all these things. And so then we get to the top of Bellacoola Hill, and I said, oh, these are the trees that we're harvesting, which is balsam. I was making balsam, and all of a sudden one of the little elders that's always so quiet kind of stuck her head around the tree, and she looked at me and she said, you're too young to know this. Who told you? You know, and so I said, my etsu, my etsu actually comes from Naguntloon, which is Algacho and Nimpo Lake. And she looked at me and she said, oh. I said, so that's why I know. And so these are some of the funding that we got to make sure that we did bring them out on the land. And it's funny how they separate themselves from the men and the women. It was all women except the 2 helpers were men that day when we went to the top of Bellacoola Hill. I believe they felt they were overpowered sometimes, but all of a sudden one of the elders tells me, we could just go to Bellacoola. I said, no, we can't. Yes, we can. We're at the top of the hill. I said, no, we can't. You know, I said, we told everybody we were going to be here. This is where she's like, you're mean. I said, no, I'm not. And she's like, and so we joked, and she said, can we just go? I said, no, we can't. Unless, I said, you know, a long time ago, I said, I asked her, how many years has your husband been passed away? And she's like, oh, over 20 years. I said, oh, maybe we can go to Bellacoola. And she looked at me like she's like, no, you're not giving me away. We're going home. I said, okay, we're going to go home. And so anyways, there's some of the jokes that came out, like it was hilarious. And so the next trip that we did was all men. And there was only a couple of us that were women. And I'm like, oh my goodness, they do things in a manner that they're comfortable with. And that was the bonus of having the different funding from projects that needed to be done within the community. I am so thankful for leadership in Tsilhqot'in that they gave us. They said, whatever you need, this is what, if this is what you want, this is what we'll do. And they were very flexible. And like Shirley-Pat said, we, First Nations Health, you know, I said, I can do, you know, I can help with the health plan. If you guys, if you can take part, you know, if you can take part, if you can take part and you can share some of the funding with us, you know, so those are some of the things that you can do. And the same thing with my job that I'm doing right now, very flexible. My main job is sexual violence, you know, within our communities. But because I have the knowledge and I guess it's carrying that knowledge for the nation. I'm able to go in to different parts of whatever's happening, and to be, because as healing happens, a lot of things crop to the surface. And so I'm very thankful for where I am and what I do today. And there is no wrong way to collect information. I was so stuck. It took me a long time to get out of that linear thinking, even if my family was very traditional. Because that's what we're taught in schools. That's what we're taught in training. That's what we're taught. This is the way you need to do things. And so there is always, you can change. It's just a guide. I reminded myself, because I'm a perfectionist when it comes to things. I finally realized it's just a guide. I can do all these things. And so we had a winter activities that the whole community took part in. That was another one. And you hear the things. And one of the other things that I'd like to bring up, I had the questions, that you have on your CCP. I got Shane, who is adopted into my family, that works at the Nation office, who you've seen in the other picture. He does mapping. And so I told him, can you put these questions on map sheets, and I can plaster it all over the hall. And so my big catch was door prizes. I'd buy door prizes with any opportunity I got, no matter where I was. If I found something, I buy it and then hoard it in my office. Anyways, we're supposed to have something else happening, and it was all
we're gonna do questions. It's okay. And you're good. I love when Joyce shares. I just let Joyce kind of just share, because you always learn something. There's so much knowledge. But when we did, maybe to the next one, when we did, she's right. And it's an idea for COVID, because a lot of times you can leave those big sheets up, and when they're on the big sheets, then everybody can see them. And when everybody can see them, they can contribute. And during COVID, they can contribute in a way that's safe. And just like the doctor's office or the dentist's office does, right? You have plastic pens, just give them a wipe down at the end, have a bucket for clean and used. Hopefully people won't put a clean or use one in the clean bucket, but that's a little bit of spray is for. So I want to turn it over to the audience now. Is there any questions or comments from anybody who's here? Anything you want to ask Shauna or Joyce or myself? For me, while we wait, if there's anyone in a question, or if you want to raise your hand or unmute, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for reminding us that even during difficult times like the pandemic, indigeneity and indigenous, and I'm going to see if I can do this as an alliteration, indigenous, indigeneity, and how do I say, ingenious? Like when you have these genius abilities to be innovative and flexible. And as Joyce said, find a way, ask the community, right? And together you'll find a way, or in that conversation, you might remember a way that has happened before, right? A way to gather, a way to be. So we'll just leave it open if any questions. If not, I just want to say, thank you to our ASL. Thank you so much. Thank you from the bottom of our heart for everything you do. Rock on. So if you'd like to join the main session again, you're more than welcome to leave the breakout. If not, Shauna and Joyce and I will hang out for a few minutes if anyone has any questions or comments that they'd like to make. Robbie, do you have anything you'd like to say, or Andrew?
No, just kind of sitting with everything that was shared. Nothing to add further. Thank you so much, Shauna, Shirley-Pat, and Joyce. That was so nice being in a room with you and listening and learning.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I always learn so much from these ladies. And Shauna, thank you. I love how you brought the water and the sea in, and that thoughts in motion reminds me so much of his honor, right? Of Stephen L. Point. He always says to me, girl or red, it's one or the other. And then I know I'm getting a lesson. He always be like the river, go with the flow. So it's that same thing, right? Put your thoughts in motion, walk in the direction of what you intend, right? Walk in that direction and you will find a way. You will definitely find a way. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, Andrew, also for the support. Cindy, if you've got any questions, let us know. If not, please join the main session. I think we've got do we have another story coming up, Robbie? We have a CCP story, don't we? Isn't that what we get next?